The Mindful Medic podcast is proudly sponsored by the Medical Benevolent Association of New South Wales, ACT. The MBA is an independent charity that has been supporting doctors in New South Wales and the ACT since 1896. They provide specialised counselling, information, referral and financial assistance to doctors and their families during times of adversity or hardship. Their aim is to provide non-judgmental support so that the doctor or family member recovers their well-being and independence and, wherever possible, returns to their vocation. Their services are free, specialised and no referral is necessary. All contact is kept strictly confidential and they are independent of any regulatory body. Hello and a warm welcome back to the podcast. If you're joining us for the first time, my name is Cheryl Martin. Welcome. I'm your host and I'm pleased to say we're now on season 3, episode 4. Before we get into today's show and I get to introduce a really fantastic guest who I've been very much looking forward to meeting and speaking with, and he did not disappoint, I just wanted to share a couple of things that I've been listening to and I've linked in the show notes. And I think that they relate and marry quite well with today's guest and the content discussed. So the first relates to another podcast that I've been listening to very recently and recommend. As it happens, today's guest is a podcast host of a really incredible podcasting platform that we will discuss today. But this is another podcast. Anyone listening for some time knows that I'm a bit of a podcast fanatic. And this podcast is called Being Better Together. And it's a collaboration between two groups in the United Kingdom, Civility Saves Lives and Learning from Excellence. I'm familiar with the Civility Saves Lives work through work of a fellow emergency physician, Dr Chris Turner, who has a really wonderful TED Talk that is worth Googling. As it happens, today's guest is also a TEDx speaker who speaks about the power of compliments. I'm familiar with the Learning from Excellence work because one of my own colleagues has embedded a Learning from Excellence initiative in our own organisation, and I am a huge fan of this work and all the really exciting research in this area. Secondly, I've been thinking a lot about how we communicate our message in healthcare, not only to our patients, to the public, but also how we communicate to each other and what gets traction when we're bombarded with so much information. Today's guest has some specific expertise in this area and I think some real talent, and so I definitely wanted to explore that. One of my colleagues has very recently introduced me to the work of Lorelei Lingard, who is an expert on rhetoric and in particular, how we communicate in health research. She speaks about reclaiming the story for science. If you're a fan of podcasting, you'll know that there's power in storytelling. And we've talked about the power of lived experience and personal narrative. And so I get to explore that today with our guest. In fact, I felt like I got a bit of a lesson in the art of rhetoric recording today's conversation. Enjoy.
So then when there's opportunities to live up to that standard for me, I feel like I'm just part of and helping to continue a really powerful tradition in our profession of how we can share information, how we can inspire creativity, how we can elevate other people. These things of a piece for me are going to drive the rest of my career.
Those are the words and wisdom of today's wonderful guest, who I'm delighted to welcome to the show, Dr. Mark Shapiro. Dr. Shapiro is a hospitalist in full-time clinical practice in Sonoma County in beautiful California. It's a role he's been in since 2006. He is board certified in internal medicine, attaining his residency at the University of California, San Diego. He has previously attained a BA in history at UCLA, and he attended medical school at Baylor College of Medicine. And he spent some time in sports journalism through that period. I think critically for me, when he first came on my radar just under 12 months ago as the creator, producer and host of a fabulous podcast, Explore the Space. And this is a show focused on addressing what he calls the gulf in healthcare and bringing together healthcare consumers and patients with clinicians and healthcare executives to have the critical conversations that we're not necessarily having. The show has a much wider remit and covers many topics close to my heart. And I'm thoroughly enjoying going back through that journey of evergreen episodes myself. Mark is also a TEDx speaker, and he delivered his first TED Talk in March of last year. Again, we'll speak about that today. And he's the co-author of the COVID-19 CV Matrix, as seen in the Journal of Hospital Medicine and Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Dr. Shapiro is an active voice on Twitter, and he can be followed at ETS Show, and we'll give a link in the show notes. He's also an avid home coffee roaster fan and Peloton bike rider, and I definitely get a coffee education today. He is a very outspoken fan of the wonderful TV show Ted Lasso, and he is the inspiration behind the Med Lasso movement that I have mentioned on this podcast, but we're going to hear from the man himself on that topic today. Mark brings so much energy, really articulate, intelligent conversation, and a lot of fun to his podcasts, and this conversation was no different. I definitely went off on tangents. There were many questions I didn't quite get to ask. Hopefully there will be a sequel. I was definitely schooled. I know that you will enjoy this conversation. I certainly did. So without further ado, let's get into it. I knew I was going to start this podcast laughing.
Yeah, totally.
Thank goodness for the edit button. I am delighted to welcome Dr. Mark Shapiro to the podcast. We talk a lot about coaching and mentoring. I've kind of come to regard him. He doesn't know me, but as that distant remote mentor. He has an incredible podcast that we're going to speak about today called Explore the Space. I will do another bio as well at the beginning. And I'm learning so much following that journey. But I wanted to talk a wee bit about the doctor and the man himself. From my understanding and my reading and my research, you are a board certified physician, probably similar vintage to me, so at least 15 years in practice as a
similar vintage.
I did a race, and I might talk about that, where it did actually say vintage runner.
Oh,
it
ouch.
was in a winery, which kind of fitted.
I don't know if I want to do this interview. I think we need to stop. No, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for that kind introduction. The vintage. I live in wine country here. I live in Sonoma County. So I'm in the heart of California wine country, and being labeled as as a vintage, I don't know. My sleep is disrupted tonight for sure, but thank you.
I've checked out the Napa Valley. I've looked at the map where you are. I'm visiting soon. But you are a hospitalist, and that isn't a term that we really have here in Australia and in the UK. And my reading around that and my understanding is that you have this really broad remit in acute medicine, in internal medicine, and in family practice in hospital. Yeah, that's a big number. You talk about the pluripotent physician, but that nails it. Can you tell me
it does.
About
It's a great description. So hospital medicine started, it's a little bit over 25 years old. It is the fastest growing specialty in the history of American medicine. It's the concept behind it was saying, how do we improve safety, how do we improve outcomes, how do we reduce morbidity and mortality for hospitalized patients as the complexity of inpatient care continues to grow and expand. And it really started actually when I was a medical student. I finished medical school in 2003, and that's right around when hospital medicine was taking hold. Like my medical school, Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, was just starting to hire hospitalists. Where I went to do my internal medicine residency at University of California at San Diego, same, just starting to figure out how to integrate hospitalists into the teaching curriculum, into the academic curriculum. It's absolutely exploded. The vast majority of American hospitals now utilize hospitalists to provide their inpatient care. So I'm board certified in internal medicine. And the way that I describe it is I'm a board certified internal medicine physician who specializes in the care of hospitalized adults. I don't do peds. I just take care of hospitalized adults. And in that space, it's like you described, it's everything. We are the primary admitters for the vast majority of people that require admission to the hospital, where at the two major centers where I've worked since I finished my residency, we co-manage with surgeons. We do consults for every other specialty. And what has since happened is that every other specialty has started to create their own hospital-based hospital medicine hospitalist program. So pediatric hospital medicine, acute care surgery, so inpatient surgical hospitalists, intensive care hospitalists, and every other specialty is sort of trying to figure that out. There's two major roads in parallel. The biggest one, right, the 6-lane freeway around this, or like the supersonic rocket train, is if you can show evidence that you're reducing morbidity and mortality with this model, if you're improving the experience of people who are hospitalized because they have more access to their physician, they're easier to reach, things happen faster, it's really hard to say we shouldn't be doing this. Yeah. On the physician side, there's a real draw because while it is very challenging, very intense, very kinetic work, it is a shift-based program where you usually will work for, the most common model is 7 days on and then 7 days off. So it's different. You end up working the full number of days as a regular full-time equivalent physician. They're just in these chunks. So you get these stretches where you're off, where they're very conducive to doing other things like podcasts. When you're on, you are all the way on. I mein, it is locked in, and it's busy. But look, I'm 16 years in as a hospitalist, and I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of conscious there's a big overlap in some of what we do, because some of those patients that I see will become that acute spectrum. That's will then go on and manage.
You'll call me to admit them, right? They'll come in through your triage. They're acutely short of breath. They're experiencing chest pain and they're confused. You're the ED doc, right? You'll do your usual workup. You'll implement, initial diagnostics and therapeutics. You'll make the decision in concert with the rest of your team and the patient and their family around what their goals are and say, look, you're too sick to go home. You have pneumonia with decompensated heart failure. I think you're septic. You're in our sepsis protocol. You need to be admitted to the hospital. You look and see who's the hospitalist on call. Oh, cool. It's Shapiro. All right. And you send me a message or a call, talk about the patient. Hey, Joe Schmo is here. Pneumonia, sepsis, decompensated heart failure, needs to be admitted. I think you should go to telemetry. Okay, cool. And then I'll come down and see him, write admit orders, and then take care of him.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose the parallel we have here is the general physician, but right. I'm kind of conscious that is becoming, we're having less and less of that true generalist. And I see myself as a generalist, and we're also having problems recruiting family practitioners. So I think there's a gulf. You talk about gulfs in healthcare, but I think we have that.
It's really good situational awareness that you see that. And I think the driver for us too is that our physicians in primary care who are seeing people in the office-based setting are so busy. They don't have the bandwidth to provide effective hospital-based care at the same time as managing a full panel of outpatients with all of the requisite telemedicine visits and electronic tasks and whatever other components of their practice there may be. They can't be rounding in the hospital at 6 a.m. and then again at 8 o'clock at night. That's not conducive to them being able to manifest any kind of effective, life. But at the same time, hospitalized patients require care, on the hour. I mean, we're seeing and reevaluating constantly. And so to provide timely and effective, safe care and expedite discharges and maximize throughput and all of the things that are required in a 21st century hospital environment, you need people who are there at the wheel all the time, just like you need people who are there at the wheel all the time in clinic. And so we are seeing this divergence. My recertification, when I had to take the board exam 10 years after my first one, I have a focused practice in hospital medicine. So we have not fully divided where the American Board of Internal Medicine has outpatient and inpatient with different board certifications. I think we are seeing that evolution in that direction, because also the skill sets and the training are very different too.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting. I mean, we're seeing this evolution right under our feet. It's really cool.
I didn't think that the conversation was already going to go there, but this is actually really interesting. And, I think that shift pattern that you've described, that's pretty intense.
Yeah.
7 on, 7 off. I don't know if that includes night working. I'm just thinking in terms of the longevity of that role, though, and you talked about the kinetic energy. Has that got longevity into your 50s and 60s?
It's a great question. We're in the first generation of hospitalists, right? I mean, I really am in some ways, and people that are of my vintage we're of a
similar exact same year. We are definitely.
Did we really? I love it. So we are. We're the same vintage. We're aging nicely on the rack. We're the test case, right? I'm 16 years in. I am still enjoying myself. I feel good, physically, mentally. I feel sharp. I've been through a lot, learned a lot. We are sort of the test case, because there isn't like a generation of doctors who were doing this really before myself and those who started being hospitalists along with me. I think we're all still really enjoying it. Certainly the challenges of the last few years have been extraordinary, but they've been that way for all of us. Whether it stands the test of time, whether it's a career that allows longevity, we'll see. I don't want to stop being a hospitalist. I'm an N of one. And it is a very interesting question that there isn't an answer to yet, because we're so young.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the question that my specialty are asking all the time at the moment.
Legit.
Yeah. And that's why I raise it.
It's so funny how on a podcast, you and I can look at each other and you can just be like, yep. And I'll say, yep. And we both know that is the most loaded yep. Like we all know exactly what we're talking about, for sure.
Yeah. And again, there's another yep.
There it is again.
And I think
when you start flipping the rocks on why, when physicians look at each other and go, yep, if we flip those rocks, that's a whole other podcast for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, from my perspective, Mark, I think that's the power of the work that you're doing with the podcast, with your social media platform. I mean, I think that you are flipping the rocks, and you're allowing us to have these conversations in a space that feels safe and supportive, to ask the tough questions, but also do that with to bring in the joy and the humor. I first found out about you and your work through Dr. Andrea Austin, who's been on the podcast, and the Med Lasso movement. And, that has taken me to then go back. I mean, I do want to talk about Med Lasso later in the conversation. But you've spoken about the arc of the Ted Lasso series. And I wanted to go back and rediscover the arc of the Explore the Space show. So, I have gone back and I'm re-listening to some of those early episodes, and I'm really enjoying that. So you started your podcast in 2015. Now, I got some really interesting background. So you have a history major, interested in American history, but you're also a sports journalist, and it just made so much sense.
That's awesome.
I want to know, you talked about this being a big passion and purpose for you, this podcast.
Yeah.
How did it come about? And I think you're doing this the best in our space at the moment, and that's why I wanted to speak to you.
That's an incredible compliment. I really appreciate it. I take that sort of thing really seriously, and it's incredibly kind of you to say that. So thank you, first and foremost. So I was an early adopter to listening to podcasts. I've always liked, audiobooks and things of that nature since I was a kid. I was working and still work with a company called the Physician Experience Project, and we do really robust organizational improvement and things of this nature, and physician coaching and clinician coaching, and I love it. When it first started, I said, you guys should have a podcast. And when I saw them start one, it doesn't exist anymore. It was a short run, but it was kind of a test case. I saw how easy it was from the tech side to just get up and running, because I'd been thinking, it'd be kind of neat to have a podcast. Maybe I could do it, maybe I couldn't. And I saw that on the tech side, it wasn't all that difficult to kind of just get it up and going. And so I did that. I was early in my career, but I was seeing this friction and this gap, this space between those who seek care and those who provide it. And I didn't know that there was a good, robust dialogue just to kind of find some shared understanding. And so that was the conceit behind the show when I started it. It's the show of one. It's just me. It still is just me. I do every component from finding the guest to post-production to editing and everything. It allowed me to have a very eclectic guest list. Whoever I want to have on comes on the show. The fuel that really drove it, number one, was some imagination, I guess, from me. But two, I am still so inspired and moved by people's enthusiasm around the cool stuff that they're doing. When I email somebody, they do not know, even now, I mean, the show is bigger than it was, and it's more. At the beginning of the show, I'm emailing, people didn't know who I was. And they would be like, yeah, sure, I'll come talk about this cool thing that I'm doing. And this enthusiasm and energy around it was so exciting. I said, okay, well, let me try doing some stuff around endurance sports. All right, cool. Let's do some stuff around climate change. Let's do some stuff around understanding gun violence in the United States. Now it's really just this extraordinary network and interface. It's so cool. I look back at the guests that I've got on the show. I'm coming up on 300 episodes. It's so cool. And the vast majority are evergreen. The vast majority you can go back and listen to now, and they're as good as the day they were recorded. That's the guest. That's not me. And I'm not saying that to be self-effacing. That's the truth. The content that they put out is just, it's extraordinary. So then when there's opportunities to live up to that standard, for me, I feel like I'm just part of and helping to continue a really powerful tradition in our profession of how we can share information, how we can inspire creativity, how we can elevate other people. These things of a piece for me are going to drive the rest of my career.
I think all that, the elevate amplification, I think you've also been very modest there. I think you get the best out of your guests. And it's been really interesting going back, because I've listened to podcasts for years and years, thought about it for several years. And I went back and, some of your guests, so Paddy Barnett, I listened to the the Paradox. Great.
Yeah.
I loved having him on. One of my colleagues here actually knows him from back in Ireland.
Oh, yeah.
And he was talking about him recently and said, I think he's thinking about relaunching his podcast. I was like, I was one of the original fans.
Wow. He's old school. Yeah.
Scott Weingart.
Yeah.
And I love this idea of evergreen episodes, because that's what I'm doing now. I'm going back and, there's still a lot of that content is still so relevant to me right now and today. And I can see that having, longevity far into the future.
The thing that I know about my show, it's interesting. I was talking about this with my parents actually before we started recording. I had lunch with them today. My show, Explore the Space podcast, is actually, it's a fun show to be a guest on. It's not an easy show to be a guest on, because I don't script anything. People will ask me, what do you want to talk about? And we kind of go over it in very vague terms. The underlying principle, the central dogma is, and I tell people this, it's going to be like improv comedy. It's going to go where it wants to go. If you say something tasty, I'm picking up on it. If I say something cool, I want you to ask me about it. If I have a list of questions and you say something awesome or provocative or inspiring, and I say, that's really neat. Now on to question 3. That's not what I want to do. I want to say, wait a minute, what did you just say? Help me understand that thing. Okay, that was totally cool. Or, hey, that's nonsense. I'm going to push back on that a little bit. That doesn't happen very often. But that's the nature of the show. And what I've become good friends with a lot of people who've been on the show, and they've all told me it's actually, you have to be pretty agile. And I tell people, I'm like, come ready, come caffeinated, come hydrated, come locked in, because we're going on a ride. And I have no idea where it's going to go either. The time is going to fly. It's going to be awesome. And when we're done, we're going to have an amazing episode of content for people to listen to.
And look, I mean, you take me on the ride. I told you I did nearly step on a snake.
I love that. I saw that. I actually saved that tweet because that was too good. I loved it.
I normally run, so they're usually not fast enough.
Yeah.
I have a little old woman's hamstring injury, talking about vintage runners at the moment. So I was just hiking, and the next minute I was like, oh no.
Oh no.
Trod right on it. Fortunately, it was more afraid.
What's the ICD-10 code for snake bite injury while listening to a podcast? I don't know if there is one yet, but there might be. I love that you're doing this while you're running, because one of the things that I have found endlessly fascinating, and we've actually done a lot of content on Explore the Space Run, is the mindset of the athlete, of the endurance athlete, of the ultra athlete. When I say ultra, like people who do extended distances, it's endlessly fascinating. It's one of the great levelers. There'll be these races where there was a big one recently where It's one of the few sports where gender does not matter. There will be one race where the man will win, and the next time they run it, the woman will win, and they will have started at the same time with no handicaps. No, they just go. And over the course of 135 miles in Death Valley in July, something about that environmental challenge is a great equalizer, and I just love it. I think it's endlessly fascinating. And the things that people who have done that stuff have come on the show and shared with me, it's knockout. It is the coolest content. It is amazingly inspiring, and I love it. And so that you're doing that sort of thing too is just too good.
Yeah, and I think you know that this is a topic that I don't tire of. Do find it, fascinating, the mindset of the endurance runner. I personally have no interest at all in running for 24 hours on a 400-meter track. I really feel that my inner demons can stay where they are. But somewhere point to point, pretty place, definitely see the appeal. Very much novice in this respect, enthusiastic amateur. Although I'm woefully underprepared, I'm planning to go back to run a bucket list race in Scotland next month called the Highland Fling, so 53 miler, about 80 Ks. I'm really looking forward to it. I do think it's going to hurt though.
Let's just spend a minute though on the idea of how we like internalize people commenting on the stuff that we do. 80 kilometers is bonkers far. It's bonkers far. Well, it's not 200 miles, but it's wildly far. There's a mindset that goes into saying, I'm going to just do that I find endlessly fascinating.
I do love how this has become you interviewing me. I was afraid this was going to happen. But, I think on that, a perspective is everything. And I do hang around with people as part of my friends and my social network who do this kind of stuff regularly and routinely. And 80 kilometers for some of them is a stroll in the park, and they do 100-mile races. But I like hanging out with them, and they kind of inspire me.
I love it.
Yeah, but I do digress. I know that you are a massive sports fan. But I'd only recently appreciated that you actually have a background in sports journalism. And as I said, it makes a lot of sense. If you don't mind, I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah. So when I was in college, I was a sports writer I went to University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. It's one of the biggest universities in the world. It's the most highly applied to university in the United States. And I loved it. I had an amazing experience there. I'm a huge sports fan. I always have been. It has an extraordinary sports tradition across the whole gamut of athletics. We have the most NCAA, National Collegiate Athletic Association, national titles in the country of any other school. So I was a sports writer there for 4 years, and I covered almost every sport. I really wanted to try a little bit of everything. I did a ton of soccer. I covered the men's soccer team for 2 years, the women's team. I covered men's and women's tennis. I covered the football team, and then I covered the basketball team. And what I learned about it, first of all, the thing that was really helpful is it de-romanticized the idea of being a professional sports writer. It's a really, really hard job. It's not hanging out with athletes and all becoming best friends. And, it's not that. It is a grind. It's a lot of nights. So I didn't want to do it professionally. It did help me understand that I could be creative at an early age, and I liked that. And it also helped me understand that I can pursue a goal I was doing and still do other things that I'm passionate about and do them both well. I didn't understand it at the time. I can stay pluripotent. I can stay undifferentiated and agile and ready to do lots of different things. I was a really good sports writer, I like to think, while I was getting ready to go to medical school, while I was doing all my pre-med stuff and taking the MCAT and all of the nonsense that you have to do to say you're worthy of attending an American medical school. That has nothing to do with anything, but that's a whole separate podcast episode. It gave me that insight into myself that I can do one thing of great value and meaning and still have room to do other things of value and meaning that may not be exactly the same.
And I think value and meaning exactly is you've nailed it there, because you're addressing the conversations that we're not having. You read the room, and so I'll kind of go back to come forward. I'm following this journey of the podcast, and I'm thinking, there's going to be a shift at some point here. And I listened to the March 2020 episode with your colleague who was the epidemiologist, and you talked about the evergreen episodes and really hoping this wasn't going to be the evergreen episode. It's taken me a while to kind of go back to that, but I did go, and because I wanted to see the shift. And then I have to be honest, I went straight then fast forward to July 2020. To 2021, sorry, when you released this fantastic episode. It's limited edition, Med Lasso. And, you've launched a movement. And again, reading the room brought the joy, just elevated people at the right time. So tell me, I am late to the party with Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
Where did Med Lasso come from? How did this happen?
It's a great question, and I'm going to be totally transparent. So whenever I do interviews, my expectation of me as the host and of my guests, and then if I'm ever a guest, I don't want anodyne answers. I don't like platitudes. I'm very clear about that. They're not effective modes of communication. If you invite me into your space, I'm going to give you the best possible answers I can. Otherwise, it's boring. Quite honestly, I mean, anodyne answers and platitudes are boring. So I am still trying to figure out what this transition was. I remember when the pandemic started, Explore the Space was never created to be a show about didactics. How do we manage heart failure? How do we best implement the transition for a patient in the emergency department to the inpatient unit? That's not what my show is about. Those are huge questions. They're important, and I don't cover them. They are covered in other places. This is a place for conversation. It's a place for curiosity and engagement. So when the pandemic started, how much do I want to dive into COVID related stuff? It was all there. I mean, my goodness, the energy and the information exchange was like nothing any of us have ever seen before. It was truly extraordinary. But how much did I want to have a show where we're talking about those really specific things? And I tried to walk the line, knowing too that this was a moment. I'm a history major, right? We have to understand the moment that we're in. We must have situational awareness. How do we then capitalize on a moment in such a fashion where we can improve the experience of those going through it with us, right? How do we look after the people next to us while we're dealing with a crisis? I've unfortunately had crisis training going through a bunch of wildfires where I live that preceded the pandemic. You do the work that's in front of you and you look out for the people that are next to you. How do we do this when we now have access to an international network through a podcast? And again, it's this idea of assimilating interests and understanding that these things that are of value and interest can intersect and they can be interconnected. I'm a huge sports fan. I love popular culture. I love comedy. My show is built around improv comedy. Jason Sudeikis is an improv comic. Ted Lasso is a show about sports on the surface. I love European soccer. I love football, our soccer. I've got my favorite Premier League team.
Who is
the
it?
show sort of, what's that?
Who is it? Sorry, I have to ask.
Tottenham Hotspur.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I come from a family, my dad thinks everything in life comes down to football. There you go. And my brother, and I grew up, everything is described in my family in a soccer,
I love
football,
it.
and
yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
And so I was into Ted Lasso really early because the original videos from like 2013, when they were just kind of trialing it, he was the Tottenham head coach. Yeah. So he's there in Tottenham kit at White Hart Lane. It was totally awesome. My best friend from high school is like, Shapiro, you really need to watch this show. And I was like, I remember those trailers. This is dumb. It's like, Shapiro, just watch the show. I watched the first 2 episodes. I'm like, this is weak sauce comedy. This show is not getting picked up. Sudeikis has made a mistake. This is bad. Shapiro, just keep watching. And then as I kept watching it, and I start to see these emerging themes, right? Teamwork, empathy, accountability, making mistakes, looking at the people around you and being accountable to them. And most of all, being kind in the face of chaos, right? Because there's a lot of that in that show. It just felt like this resonates with what we're all experiencing right now. We are experiencing chaos. We have big teams of people around us. We are all going through things in different ways, but we do want to keep going, as the man says, onward, forward. It just felt kind of right. And it is also felt fun. It also just felt like, I hope I can use this thing. It just felt like a lot of fucking fun.
Yeah.
And we all just needed to have a little bit of fucking fun. And so, I have a great sidekick, Dr. Syed Tabatabai at The Real Dr. T on Twitter. He's an extraordinary writer. Yeah. He and I have become friends through social media. We've never met in person. Wonderful guy. I said, I've got this idea. Do you want to co-host with me? Because this needs a co-host. This is a 3-personer. This is not Shapiro interviewing one person. This is a studio show where we can really riff and be super agile and super energetic and silly and kinetic and sensitive and thoughtful. And we said, okay, cool, let's do it. We're both super busy. The pandemic is still on. Let's do one episode about season 2 at the beginning. We'll do one in the middle and one in the end. We did the first one, and within like a week, I'm like, Syed, we got to do every episode. He's like, all right, let's do every episode. We did every episode of season 2. We threw in some other cool stuff. Now we're going back and doing every episode of season 1 with more cool stuff to come. There's like our first live show is coming up at the Society of Hospital Medicine annual meeting. And then when season 3 comes, it's going to be completely wild. I cannot wait. We're going to have so much fun. Hashtag MedLasso on social media, though, which this is the part I did not expect. I look at the hashtag just for fun. A lot of people use it and a lot of people enjoy it. And it's not like, thanks, Shapiro, thanks to Tabata. It's this thing. And that is awesome. Like we have this thing now that we can learn from, we can have some fun with, and we can have some community in around, when that sense of community I felt like for a lot of us was really lacking. And here we are.
Yeah, and that's why we're having this conversation. That is the power of this in terms of community. I didn't realize that you and Syed hadn't met before, so there you go. That's also interesting.
No,
because I imagine you feel that you know each other pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I look forward to meeting him. I can pick him out of a crowd, I'm confident. But yeah, no, we've never met. And it's interesting, and I don't know about you, but over the course of the pandemic, I have become very comfortable with the idea of friendship formation through electronic communication only. As I've said on my show, I feel like I'm 45 years old. Making new friends as an adult is hard. It's really hard.
Definitely.
And so I don't want to feel constrained by it. If I feel like someone and I have things in common, and we can goof off and have some fun and entertain one another and learn from one another. And hey, it's even to the point now where we're there for one another. I'm totally fine with that. I'm not going to give them my credit card number, but my best friend that I've known since I was 5 doesn't have, like, you know what I mean? I think we can allow ourselves that space to say, you know what, you seem like a really nice person. We riff together. It's super fun. Let's call each other a friend and move on. I'm comfortable with that. And I think that it's part of our space and time that we're in, but I think it's great. I really think it's great.
No, completely agree. And interestingly, just do the podcasting rather than the med Twitter. I mean, Andrea and I now have monthly Zoom. A few other people that I met again first time through the podcast. We regularly connect. And I am going to be coming to
right. You're going to do meaningful collaboration with these people for the rest of your career. I would say that's probably a friend.
I'm flying to San Diego to meet her. So
oh my gosh, you're going to love. I lived there for 16 years. For how long was I there? 13 years. 3 years of residency, and then I was an attending there for 10 years. San Diego's rad. Oh, you're coming at a good time. You're gonna have fun. Yeah.
So the other thing is, you've talked about the Ted Lasso series, and if you're not listening to it or if you've not watched it, hopefully people listening now will get.
That's an important thing to call out, though. You don't have to watch the show to enjoy the Med Lasso phenomenon. Sure. People ask me, Mark, do I need to watch the show? You don't need to do anything. This is a television show. If it feels meaningful and enjoyable, or you just want a little bit of a distraction, it's there for the taking. If you don't, you're going to have a great life, and you can still enjoy Med Lasso and shoot the breeze and talk about whatever you want to talk about, or not, and it's all fine. People say like, oh, am I missing out? You're not missing out on anything. You have a huge life in the midst of a pandemic. Do you? If you want to check it out, I think you'll enjoy it.
I think that's a really important point. No, you've got me there. Although I mean, you can just talk about peanut butter jar on or off.
Anyone can. What's your ruling on tea?
Oh, well, I was going to get there. That was on the. So I'm going to ask you first.
All right, I love it. So my parents are South African.
Though? That's the important thing, and I'm
my parents are South African. They emigrated before I was born, but I grew up in a tea drinking household.
Rhubarb?
So, only rarely at night. My parents grew up in the English tradition. Red Rose it still is their tea of choice. Growing up, it was a little bit of sugar and a little bit of milk. Now I just put a little bit of milk in it, and I might put a little honey in it. I try not to do too much refined sugar anymore. Ooh. Honey is not the same as sugar. It's better with sugar in it. I'll just be honest, but I try to be mindful about my refined sugar intake. But yeah, no, I love it. I mean, I'll probably have some when we're done. So I'm perfectly comfortable with it. Everyone else comes on Med Lasso and they complain and they grumble. I'm like, pour me a cup. I'll take it. How about you?
Tea. So I drink a lot of green tea. I have to be honest. I did. My nana made me my first ever cup of proper English tea, and she I think she put too much sugar in it. Just talking about sugar, and my
Oh,
last mouthful was this like congealed,
you
like
gotta stir.
syrupy. Oh,
Mm-mm.
and
No,
that
that's
was
gross.
enough. That put me
No,
off.
yeah.
So
I'm
I don't
sorry.
put milk or sugar in my tea. I just have it black.
That
Um,
perfectly fine. Yeah, no, that's and I love sweets. That syrup layer, if it's not stirred properly, coffee's the same. It's gross. It's not nice.
you're a bit of a coffee connoisseur, though. So yeah, tell me. I've got a story about coffee, so I wanted to ask you about the art
I
of
love
coffee. What
coffee.
makes the perfect coffee for you?
So I roast my own. I've been
Mm,
roasting my own coffee for gosh, a long time.
the
I
Melbourne
really
guys
enjoy
are gonna
roasting my own
love
coffee,
this.
and it's the best. But I mean, again, coffee is one of those things where people say, "Oh, Mark, I only drink this thing." I'm like, if you're enjoying what you're drinking, enjoy it. I don't. Who am I to judge you or say like that is less than or greater than? Enjoy your beverage, man. It's fine. Um, I enjoy coffee in pretty much any form. I don't drink too much, maybe 2 cups a day, definitely one in the morning. But I roast my own. I've figured out that Rwandan single origin beans are my favorite, and then anything in a pea berry. One in every 5,000 coffee cherries is a pea berry. It's this little tiny mutant thing, and they'll separate them and they'll package them up separately. If you ever see pea berry attached to any coffee when you're shopping for coffee or at a coffee house in Tasmania, get it. It it's like nothing you've ever tasted. It's the best. I roasted some 2 days ago from Rwanda. Out of
I
control. I'd
knew I
send you
was
some if I
gonna
could.
learn something today, so I've got two
It's
questions. So I only found
go.
out coffee was actually a fruit, the coffee
Yes.
bean in Kona actually when I was at the Ironman sports medicine conference a few years ago. Did a coffee
Yep.
tour, so
Yep.
learned that. How do you even go about roasting your own coffee beans?
It's super cool. Do you remember the old air popcorn poppers?
Yes, yes.
That's all it is. It's just passing heated air, just convection over the bean for a controlled period of time. Now, the roasters that are out there, like the one that I have, it's fairly sophisticated. I mean, you
Yeah.
can program like how long at this temperature and then how long at this temperature, and it's got a rotating drum where you can see it. And then there's phases to the roasting process. You can see how your bean is progressing and then decide when you want to turn it off. It doesn't take very long from taking the thing off, setting it all up to, beans on the counter ready to go. 30 minutes, everything cleaned up, put away, and it's cheap. A pound of green beans. I have a whole shtick on this. A
Oh
pound of
no,
green
you're
beans is
you're
like,
speaking to the Christy Scott, so
yeah,
carry
it's
on.
like $6. It's like $6. 12 ounces of roasted beans from some gourmet coffee house is like 18.
Yeah.
And green beans are shelf stable for over a year. Roasted coffee is like bread. It's going stable. It's going stale the minute you take it out. So roasting your own is super fun, but just enjoy whatever's in your cup. There's a great podcast I was on called Visible Voices, and Risa Lewis hosts it. She's an ER doc at Jefferson University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And we just talked about all of this stuff. And that's my whole shtick on roasting coffee. But coffee, I mean, look, coffee's great. It's it's the best. Any hour of the day, I'll drink it. I don't mind. It's the best.
I have to admit that so I did two things when I was growing up. I didn't eat peanut butter and I didn't drink coffee. I grew up in Scotland. I don't think we had peanut butter in the house. And my mom had a jar of it wasn't international roast, but it was Nescafe, so that was coffee to me. I quite liked the smell of it, to be honest, but I just thought no, my palate wasn't sophisticated at that point. So I moved to Melbourne, fast forward quite a few years later, so probably 2005. I remember landing at the airport and on the plane they were saying, "Welcome to Melbourne, the coffee capital of Australia." And I went, huh? And then, so I had my first latte in Alf's Caff in the Alfred Hospital. And me and my Irish friend Fran are sitting there just between our teaching day at Doctors and we're sipping our coffee. One of my colleagues, born and bred Aussie, Melburnian, literally spat out her coffee. She went, "This is burnt." And I looked down at my half empty cup and I was like, what? No clue.
That's
And
I
now
love that she spat it out.
I'm not roasting my own beans, but I have an AeroPress and I have a grinder and yeah, so
If
there
you've
I
got
go.
an AeroPress, you're home. That's the best tool. I love it. I love my AeroPress. It's awesome. Um, the vast majority of commercially available coffee, even from high-end stores, is burnt because that's how they get a homogeneous flavor. They can buy cheap beans, burn them, and market them. So I know that's not why you had me on here for Coffee 101, but
Oh,
yeah,
but this is important for healthcare. This
it's
great and
critical. Hashtag MedGrind. We have a hashtag around it. We have a whole meeting. Like people, there's a hashtag for Med Twitter to talk about coffee. Yes, hashtag MedGrind. And it's what are you drinking? And oh, we have this at our hospital. Oh my gosh, we have that at our hospital. It's not snooty. It's I'm post call. What should I drink? Hey, it's Sunday morning. What kind of mug are you? It's the best. Hashtag MedGrind on Twitter is so fun.
I'm going to dig something out for you from the archives. There was this, when I was a med student, there was a sitcom comedy called TLC, Tender Loving Care. And it only had one series. And it was, the jokes were two in. And there was this whole episode on the caffeine, coffee seeking habits of healthcare workers. It was gold. They had another one, all the new interns had just started, and there was this intern, he was terrified about attention pneumothorax. And he'd go around on all of his patients and draw X's on second interspace, mid-clavicular line. And the last scene was, he's coming in, a patient's turning blue, choking in front of him. He gets the cannula, he puts in the Gelco, and the patient coughs up the teeth that they've been choking on. It was, but you had to be in the profession to, you had to be a clinician to know.
I want to see that show. That sounds really funny. That sounds very niche, but it sounds very funny.
We've totally digressed, but that was an awesome.
I'm glad.
Little side trail. So
you're a distance runner, man. There's side trails, and you say, you know what? I'm just going to go that way, and let's see what happens.
I've got lost in many races doing that, though, Mark.
Yeah, but those are good stories, and here we are.
Indeed. But I think you've just given me a good segue into, one of the other big topics that I wanted to explore with you this morning, and that relates to storytelling. I think you're a powerful storyteller, and I think we both appreciate the power of that. I've spoken on my podcast quite a few times about the power of personal narrative, our stories as clinicians, our patient stories, as a way into having the difficult conversations. But it does get me thinking more generally about how we communicate as clinicians, between ourselves and to our patients. And I think that is something that has really gained a spotlight over the past few years in particular, when there is so much information and a lot of misinformation out there. And I heard you speak on your own podcast a few weeks ago. You were part of a summit that you were facilitating. At the end, all the clinicians were asked about what they'd like to see in the future of healthcare. And you said that you would like to see media training be something more endemic in our space. So I'd really love to hear your thoughts, and I know you'll have them on this topic.
It's a very simple thought for me. The ability to speak about topics relevant to the public health with a broad audience are part of the job. They are mandatory. They're mandatory, and I don't use that word lightly. They are part of the job. We are way behind because we've had generations where we were told exactly the opposite. Don't engage, it's unprofessional, don't be on social media, you could damage your career, all et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is part of the job to be comfortable as a healthcare professional to speak to a broad audience about issues pertaining to the public health.
100% agree.
So if we accept that, we must teach it. We must provide coaching. It's very learnable. The interest of people is variable, and that is okay. Some people love it. I love public speaking. I like being up on stage. Some people have genuine situational anxiety around things like that. And then everything in between. All of those experiences and ideals around it need to be embraced, but everyone that enters the profession of providing healthcare must understand that is part of the job about it. We cannot have vacuums. We cannot have confusion around who is saying what and when. And we cannot rely on just a handful of voices to do the work. We need legions. We need everybody to be able to say, yeah, I can go do that interview. I'd be happy to sit on that panel. I would love to speak about this topic. Oh, can I please come to your kid's classroom and talk about my work? We need everybody to be trained up and ready at a moment's notice to go on a podcast, to go in front of the camera, to give an interview to a reporter and understand what it means to go on the record. This is part of the job now. And if we are not equipping people with the basic tool set needed to navigate social media, to understand what it means to be on the record, to be comfortable with talking about things within their expertise, and also understanding that is not within my area of expertise, but I've got 10 people that I can give you who can nail it for you. Yeah. Mr. or Mrs. Producer person from the TV station. We're awry, and we've seen the impact of this. We've seen the problem with leaving a vacuum in the public discourse. Nature abhors a vacuum. It will be filled. It needs to be filled with information from people who've done the work and understand the science and can speak to the uncertainty and the challenge and the tension. So that's the central dogma that I think is critically important. It is part of the job.
And I mean, I read the white paper that you've been involved in, and how do you see us? I mean, is this happening much in America at the moment in terms of access to media training for doctors? It seems to be very piecemeal here.
That's the word. It's very piecemeal, very heterogeneous. I think the interest is there. Interest and implementation are two very different things. When you're in a major academic institution, getting a line item in the budget that says we're going to fund this is very different from people saying on an email thread, yeah, this is a really cool idea. Bridging that divide is not trivial. I mean, we know how the engines run. There are other ways that we can learn this and teach this and coach this. And that's one of the places that a forum like MedTwitter is so powerful. There are great people there that share amazing content around how to do this differently and better. But we need to be doing this at scale. I mean, we need, like I said, this is part of the job. There are many, many hundreds of thousands of healthcare professionals around the world, some of whom don't have even the most basic understanding of how these things work. And that is not their fault. I'm not criticizing them. It just hasn't been part of the curriculum, nor has it been recognized as an essential aspect of maintaining the public health. So it's a climb, but it's a climb worth doing, because when people gather that skill set and understand where they can apply it, and that it affects their direct patient care, it affects how they work with their teams, and maybe it helps them understand new career paths that they may find interesting, you see light bulbs go off. In the people that I've had the opportunity to work with, now granted, there's some sampling error because they're the ones seeking out the training, so they're already pretty enthusiastic. None of them say, yeah, this was a bad idea, this wasn't for me. They get fired up. They want opportunities. They want the producer from CNN to ping them and put them on. And it's not to get rich. It's not to line their pockets. It's not to become an influencer. It's because they feel the commitment that their job, just like at the bedside, is to maintain the public health. Let's do this at scale. I know about this stuff. Let me come and share it with you.
Yeah, wonderful. It's something that I think about a lot, how, we're just bombarded with so much information from so many different sources. And, how do we get the right information to the right people at the right time? And I think if we struggle to do that as clinicians, you can understand why, our patients and the public find it really difficult to access the right information. And I'm always thinking about, what gets traction. I'm looking to find that. And I do think that stories are a way in, and the power of our personal stories. I noticed that, small videos and little bite-sized vignettes, these things do seem to have some kind of traction as a way in to then share more information. But it's something I'm struggling with.
There's a maxim that I like: give the people what they want. Right now, distribution of healthcare information within and beyond the profession is not giving the people where they want, and it's not meeting the people where they live. Everyone is on social media. No one wants to check their email. No one wants to do a mandatory module they want to do things in the manner in which they consume sports highlights or a movie trailer or a movie, or playing video games with their friends on a common online platform. We must become more sophisticated in how we distribute information and do it in a way that becomes normal for people, as opposed to, we have this thing that you have to do that's outside of the things that you normally associate with enjoyment and aspiration and challenge and fellowship and friendship and fun. This is other. This is a time sink. This is something different. That should be an easy bridge to divide, but that's one of the big barriers that exists right now. I don't want to get another email, but I love getting text messages. That's just me. And I think we can do research to find out what is the best. There is a reason that podcasts have become such an extraordinary tool for medical education, right? Medical students and residents and fellows and attendings love didactic podcasts. They love them because
I
you
go running
learn in the
listening
way
to
that
EM Rap. Yeah, that was my
they're
fellowship
awesome.
training. It was great.
They're so good. Curbsiders, CP solvers. These
GM
shows are,
cases.
they're so good. How are we have an opportunity. It's not the question of why are we not, it's look at what is before us. Look at how we get to shape the way we learn, and look at the fun that we can have when we do it, where it becomes this, where the Venn diagram of things that feel enjoyable and aspirational and inspiring become more of a circle, or as opposed to having two totally separate things where over here is my CME and over here is my fun. We can totally bring those things much closer together in a way that is absolutely sustainable and will have superior outcomes by any measure.
And that's what you're doing with this podcast. That you talk about the gulf, between us as clinicians, the healthcare executives, the consumers, our patients.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think you're particularly articulate, and I find it very easy to listen to you. But I listen to the TED Talk because I love TED Talks, and so I've got a couple of questions about that because
Sure.
I'm going to link that in the show notes. I like that it wasn't too long, so it was only 10 minutes. So some of the TED Talks are 20 minutes. So this is quite, again, bite-sized. I didn't know if you had any notes or had done any prep for that, but you were in flow. That was I just sublime. I think it's a real joy to listen to. And you're talking about the power of compliments, and essentially compliments as a catalyst to elevate all of us and our performance. And this is something, again, I'm particularly interested in. I've spoken a bit about it on the podcast with my colleague Eve Purdy and her research around the small moments matter. And my own colleague Ray has set up a learning from excellence platform in our department and organization where we can, call out the excellence. But I'm conscious this is something that we can do every day. This is low hanging fruit. So I'd love to know how the TED Talk came about.
Credit to you, first of all, for having a pathway where you can call out things on the everyday basis, because what we do in 21st century medicine is unbelievably cool by any measure. You work in the emergency department. What you and your teams do every day is unbelievably cool. It is awesome. It's everything. It's every emotion. It's technically difficult. It requires extraordinary dexterity. It requires anything you can think of to do this job. And so why don't we call each other out? Why don't we take these opportunities? We know that giving somebody a compliment pulls all the right levers in their brain and your brain around, again, the things we're looking for: aspiration, connection, performance improvement, accountability, team building. All of these things happen. So in creating that TED Talk, it was really cool. I was asked to give it, and they said, you can speak about whatever you want. And I said, I want to talk about compliments. I don't remember where that came from. I don't remember the specific context. It just felt right. We did a trial run. It was me with the producers, and they were sort of telling me, okay, here's how the show's going to run. And I was like, okay, cool. This should be a quick call, 15 minutes. And they're like, all right, go ahead. I said, what? And they're like, yeah, let's go. Let's hear it. I said, okay. So I went for it. And I was like, 30 seconds in, I was like, I need to record this on my phone because I'm on fire right now. This is awesome. I'm like, I am rolling. This is great. So I recorded it. They gave me immediate feedback because I was riffing. They gave me some immediate feedback that was really great. Some of it was, contextual. Some of it was technical. And some of it was like, hey, the audience are these people. Let's focus. It's fine. And reworked it and let it fly. I feel like I am at my best again. And I feel like all of us are at our best when we can be unencumbered, where we can be agile, where we can be dynamic and creative and go. And then that was fun. It felt really good. I did do some preparation. I did have some notes. I did rehearse it a few times. I did not do it cold, but it was a big swing, and I loved it. It was really, really cool. And I'm glad that it's gotten some nice feedback, because what nicer thing can we do for one another that's right there? We have an unlimited supply. We have unlimited credit of how often we can say with specificity, not just good job, because that can almost sometimes be a platitude, but hey, the way to go back to the analogy, the way you handled that emergent tension pneumothorax, I thought it was really impressive. You calmed the room down, you got your equipment ready, you reassured the patient, you did not miss. And now that was killer. I learned from you. I really appreciate that. That's a compliment. Good job is nice. Like, hey, good, but going through specifically and with intention and granularity about what the person did that resonated for you, they are never, to the day they die, going to forget what you said to them.
Yeah, gold. You can really see Coach Shapiro coming to the table here. But, I think we very much undervalue that type of specific, deliberate, positive feedback that is really constructive in elevating someone's performance. And I think on that idea of I appreciate you in Ted Lasso, I've only recently realised that I probably wasn't interpreting that in the way intended, so not just that I respect, I value, I admire your work, but I actually want to make it appreciate and add value and to elevate that performance. And I think on this idea of coaching and topic, I've said at the beginning of this that I wanted to have you on this podcast because I do regard you as a podcasting mentor. I'm taking this conversation as a coaching session. When I'm listening to your podcast, I'm not just listening to content. I'm also listening to the way you interact with guests and how you deliver that content. Because I do think, I'm learning in this respect all the time. Finding your voice is hard. I'm getting used to the ums and ahs that I bring to the table, but that is me. That is me off podcasting, so I'm quite at peace with that. But I'm well aware that in terms of finding, we say, that authentic voice, and being able to bring that out in guests is something that I'm always looking to improve. So appreciate any words of advice, wisdom from yourself after all these years of podcasting.
Here's the thing. Quote unquote authentic self, again, can easily fall into that bucket of a term that is heavily used and may be understood differently. And so whenever we're using these terms I think it's important to have situational awareness. What do we really mean by authentic self? And then define it thusly. Otherwise, you're falling into some leadership book that somebody wrote that, Harvard Business Review wrote an article about, and it somehow fell into the lexicon. I think that authenticity comes with going that step further and being specific and granular about what does the authenticity mean for you, and then expressing that and then expecting it and giving a safe space for your guests to do the same. It can be unspoken, but moving past those terms that become catch-alls, I think is critically important to having people feel like this is different, this is exciting, this is something I haven't heard before.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that is so well said. Like you, I've got a real passion for this process and platform, and I think you've given me something really constructive to work with there. Thank you. So, I'm conscious that you have, a real passion for your podcasting. You are a very busy clinician. We've just got a bit of a snapshot of, what that roster looks like. And it certainly looks like an endurance sport, being a hospitalist in a busy organization. We have a lot of conversations on this podcast about how you integrate work and life, how you say no and set boundaries, and how you make space for yourself in the midst of competing responsibilities. So I'd really, love to hear how you navigate that for yourself.
I would love to have you develop a 10 episode arc of those things that you just listed out. How do you say no? How do you create space? What does authenticity mean for you? I think that it would be really, really compelling. I think those are really important questions. I think, first of all, we have to understand that the answer that one person gives is not the answer for me. It's my answer. Coming up with my answer. And look, I speak from a place of having done a lot of really hard work and made a lot of mistakes and not understood who I am and where I am and continuing to work at it. It's a living document, but it needs to be written. It needs to be codified. what are my goals? What are my aspirations? What are my priorities? What are my barriers? And how do I deal with that interplay? Things that it's hard work. You have to be very specific. You can't just say, I want to help people. That's not adequate. I want to take care of myself. That's not enough. You have to go a lot deeper. What does it mean to you in 2022 to do those things? In that space, then, by whatever mechanism you want to organize those thoughts, you then have to know going into it and be comfortable with the idea that some of them are going to go, because you cannot do all of it. And if you try, you're not going to do any of it very well. So then you say, what is the skill set around learning how to say no? This is the key thing that I have come to learn. It is a coachable skill like any other. Understanding the dynamics, understanding the right ways to frame it, but most importantly, understanding that when you decide, I can't do this, that you must do it. You have made a pact with yourself to say no to that entity. You got to do it. So these are parts of just hard evolution and hard grind that we go through so that we can live lives of meaning and purpose and not feel like they're being diluted by things that don't leave us feeling that sense of meaning, that sense of purpose, feeling whole. It's hard, and that's okay. It's time consuming, and that is okay. But it's work that's worth doing, because when you do it, you hone in on the things where you can really knock it out of the park, where you can knock it for 6.
And on that, I meant to ask, have you had a professional coach, or do you have one currently?
I have had the same physician coach since like my 3rd year out. Steve Beeson, who founded the company that I talked about earlier, Practicing Excellence, he and I were colleagues with Sharpie Seeley Medical Group in San Diego. And I met with him. He was the physician coach for the medical group. And I said, Steve, I need a coaching session. I feel like things are getting stale. I'm a young attending. I don't want my whole career to feel like this. And we sat down and we had a long conversation. That's what led me to working with this company that he was just starting. But the point of all of that is, the normalization of coaching in our profession is so critically important, because the skills that are there, let me rephrase it, the expectations that we are held to include skills that we were never taught, we are accountable for, and they are eminently coachable. The barrier is that we in medicine, even though we have all had music coaches, art coaches, tennis coaches, soccer coaches, somehow in our profession have decided that coaching equals remediation. Coaching equals you suck. Coaching equals you are not up to par. You should be flying on your own. That's stupid. That is old thinking. It is holding us back. And we want to get back to when you first met your tennis coach and they showed you how to rip a one-handed backhand, and then they fed you 100 balls to make sure you locked it in, to get back to understanding that we can do the same things with introducing yourself to a patient or running a meeting or understanding how to say no.
Can you do a TED Talk on that, please?
You do it. I'll nominate you. You do it. Tell me which one you want to do. I'll nominate you. I'm
conscious that it's on the hour, and I know that you've said yes to this and trying to be conscious of your time. But I just wanted, do you mind if you got time for one more question?
One more question. Let's do it.
So you initially with Med Lasso had said this is going to be a limited series, and I was listening to your latest episode of Med Lasso, and you're talking about the 3-season arc, maybe there'll be some spin-offs, but then you said, but Med Lasso, could go anywhere.
Yeah, I was wrong. I know my forecasting when I said this is going to be a limited run, that was wrong. And I'm glad to be able to say I misread the tea leaves. My prognostics were totally off on that one. No, this is going to last.
I don't know. Where would you like it to go next?
I don't know. I want to enjoy season 3. I don't want to enjoy the show. I mean, I'm going to enjoy watching the show. I want to enjoy and grow the sense of community that we have around this, that people from all over the world say this is really, really cool. And they say it's really cool because they get to talk, they get to swap notes on the show. They get to think about the fashion. They get to think about the shoes. They get to think about the jokes. They get to think about the pop culture references, but they also get to think about, how is this a reflection of my life right now? And how does this apply to my current context? And all of those around me. And in doing so, look at all the friends that we found, right? Look at we have this mindset now. How do we make friends as adults? Well, look at all these new friends I'm making. As the pandemic wanes and we can congregate, I mean, the sky's the limit. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, we can do what we want with this. If we want to have a Med Lasso convention, we're going to have a fucking Med Lasso convention, and it's going to be awesome. Yeah. I mean, why wouldn't we do it? Right. It'll be hard work, but we'll do it. It'd be amazing. Right. We're going to do all kinds of fun stuff. The only limit we're going to have is how much time we can put into it. But we have found something as a community here. It's a very inclusive thing that we found. We cannot squander it, and we won't. We just won't. We're going to make the most of it, and we're going to have a lot of fun.
What a great note to end on. Dr. Mark Shapiro, thank you so much. It's been a real blast and pleasure to speak to you. I knew this episode was going to be gold, and you did not disappoint.
What a treat. Thank you for having me on. This was great.
And just finally, another aim of this episode was to share some of the great work that you're doing at the Explore the Space show and, further progress the Med Lasso movement. So for anyone listening who maybe hasn't come across your work, can you let us know where to find you?
That's wonderful. You can find it at explorethespaceshow.com. I'm on all the major podcast platforms as well. I'm mostly on Twitter. You can hit me on, I'm at ETS Show on Twitter. I'm on Instagram at Explore the Space Show, and I'm still learning Instagram. I'm comfortable on Twitter. So yeah, you can find me in all those places. And, the show's a lot of fun. Explore the Space is there. If you go to the page, you'll find all the Med Lasso episodes. It's all under one big roof. But this was an absolute blast. Thank you for having me on.
You've been listening to the Mindful Medic podcast. I will put a link in the show notes to the ETS show and to all the other links discussed here, including Mark's TED Talk. I'll also put a link so that you can rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. And I look forward to joining you next time.
Shapiro, just keep watching. And then as I kept watching it, and I start to see these emerging themes, right? Teamwork, empathy, accountability, making mistakes, looking at the people around you and being accountable to them, and most of all, being kind in the face of chaos, right? Because there's a lot of that in that show. It just felt like this resonates with what we're all experiencing right now. We are experiencing chaos. We have big teams of people around us. We are all going through things in different ways, but we do want to keep going, as the man says, onward, forward. It just felt kind of right. And it is also felt fun.
The MBA New South Wales ACT does wonderful work for those of our colleagues who are, at this very minute, experiencing a hard time. One way you can show you care about doctors' welfare is to go to their website, www.mbansw.org.au, and donate today. Knowing that their colleagues' care is a big part of these doctors' recovery, so please be part of the solution. All donations are tax deductible. If you can, please consider a monthly donation, as even small amounts collectively will allow them to plan their growth to support the increased demand.